It was a cold evening when the single father left work. The sun had already disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the streets wrapped in darkness. He had finished his long shift at a small warehouse, tired but relieved that another day of work was done. His child was waiting at home, probably drawing or watching cartoons, and the thought of getting back warmed him up as he walked toward his old car. The streets were quiet, with only a few cars passing and the occasional distant sound of barking dogs. As he drove slowly through a less crowded part of town, his eyes caught something unusual. There was a figure lying on the side of the road, half in the shadow of a streetlight. At first, he thought it might be a person who had fallen or someone resting, but then he saw the uniform. It was a police officer, slumped on the sidewalk, barely moving. His heart immediately raced, and he pulled the car to a stop with a screech. Without thinking twice, he ran toward the officer. The officer's face was pale. His breaths were shallow and irregular. The father could see the faint tremor of pain in his body. He bent down, calling softly, "Sir, can you hear me?" There was no response at first, just the faint flicker of movement in the officer's eyes. Panic rose in the father's chest. He had no medical training, no experience with emergencies like this, but he couldn't just stand there. Something inside told him that if he didn't act, the man might not make it. He reached out carefully, checking for a pulse. His fingers trembled slightly when he felt it, a faint, irregular beat that sent a chill down his spine. The officer's eyes fluttered open for a moment, trying to focus, and then rolled back. The father's mind raced. He remembered bits and pieces of first aid he had learned years ago in a brief course at work, and he tried to keep his calm. "Hang on," he whispered, more to himself than the officer. He pulled out his phone and called emergency services. His voice shook as he explained the situation, giving the location as best as he could. The dispatcher assured him help was on the way, but when he looked at the officer again, he realized time was running out. The officer's breathing had become weaker. His lips were turning slightly blue. The father's mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination. He couldn't wait for someone else to save the man. He had to act. He gently lifted the officer's head, trying to keep his airway open, and checked his breathing again. Each shallow breath made the father's heart tighten. He had never been in a situation like this before. He felt his own fear clawing at him, but he pushed it down, focusing only on the officer. Minutes felt like hours as he waited, watching the street, hoping for the sound of sirens. The cold night air seemed sharper now, and the shadows of the streetlights danced across the officer's pale face. The father wiped the sweat from his brow, his hands shaking. He whispered again, "Stay with me, sir. You're going to be okay. Just hold on." When he realized the officer might not make it if he waited any longer, he made a decision that seemed impossible, even to himself. He gently lifted the officer into his car, careful not to worsen any injuries. The weight was heavier than he expected, and he had to adjust his grip several times. The officer groaned softly, and the father whispered words of encouragement, feeling a strange mix of fear and responsibility. Once inside the car, he tried to keep the officer stable in the passenger seat. He wrapped a jacket around him as best as he could, trying to protect him from the cold. He glanced at the dashboard clock and realized every second counted. He started the engine and drove toward the nearest hospital, cautiously but quickly, weaving through the quiet streets. Each red light, each turn felt like a test of his patience and resolve. He kept glancing at the officer, monitoring his shallow breaths, willing him to stay alive. The father's mind wandered briefly to his own child at home. He imagined his little one drawing a picture, unaware of the emergency unfolding miles away. The thought of returning to that warm, safe space gave him a small surge of courage. He knew he had to get the officer to the hospital no matter what. Even if it meant taking risks he wasn't sure he could handle. As he drove, he tried to keep the officer talking, asking simple questions, calling out his name if he knew it. Anything to keep him conscious. There were moments when the officer's responses were weak, almost inaudible, and the father's heart jumped in panic. He adjusted the seat, checked the pulse again, and whispered words of reassurance. The city streets seemed endless that night. Every turn, every passing car made him anxious that he might be too late. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but he also felt an unexpected clarity. He was not just a single father now. He was someone who could make a difference in another person's life. Someone whose actions mattered in that moment more than anything else. Finally, the hospital appeared in the distance, its lights bright against the dark sky. The father's heart leaped with relief and renewed tension. He pulled up to the emergency entrance and rushed inside, calling for help as he carried the officer. Nurses and doctors appeared, taking over quickly, asking questions, checking vital signs, and moving the officer to a gurney. The father stepped back, trying to catch his breath, feeling both relief and fear. He watched as they worked, a sense of helplessness washing over him. All he could do now was wait, hope, and trust that his quick decisions and courage had made a difference. A nurse finally looked at him and nodded, saying that the officer was stable for now, but recovery would take time. The father felt a mix of emotions, relief, exhaustion, and a strange pride in having acted when others might have hesitated sitting in the hospital waiting area. He rubbed his tired hands over his face and thought about what had just happened. The night had started as any other, a simple drive home after a long day, and now he had been part of something life-changing. The father realized that ordinary people could face extraordinary moments, and that courage often appeared in the simplest acts of humanity. He glanced at the clock, still feeling the chill of the night seep into his bones. The hospital was quiet, filled only with the occasional sound of footsteps and distant voices. He thought of his child again, imagining the warmth of home and the comfort of familiar routines. And he promised himself that he would go home, not just as a parent, but as someone who had faced fear and acted with heart when it mattered most. The father's mind replayed the events. The officer's pale face, the struggle to lift him, the drive through the empty streets. He knew that what he had done would not be remembered by many, but to him, it would remain a vivid memory forever, a night when he chose courage over fear and compassion over hesitation. It was a night that had changed him, a night that reminded him of the power of human action, even in the face of uncertainty and danger. And as he sat there waiting for news, he understood that life could throw unexpected challenges at anyone. It could place ordinary people in extraordinary situations, and it was in those moments that true character was revealed. He had acted not because he wanted recognition, not because he wanted reward, but because it was the right thing to do. And that realization gave him a quiet strength, a sense of purpose that went beyond the struggles of daily life, beyond the worries of bills and responsibilities. Hours passed slowly. The father remained in the waiting room, thinking about the fragility of life and the value of every single moment. He thought about the police officer, a stranger who now depended on the courage of someone he had never met. He thought about how easily things could have gone wrong, and yet, against the odds, he had made a difference. He realized that life often demanded bravery in ways people did not expect. And sometimes the bravest thing anyone could do was to simply act with compassion. By the time dawn was breaking, casting a soft glow through the hospital windows, the father felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. He had faced one of the most intense nights of his life, and although the future was uncertain, he knew he had done all he could. The memory of the officer's struggle, the weight of responsibility, and the urgency of those moments would stay with him forever. He had stepped into a situation that demanded courage, and he had answered the call without hesitation. And in that quiet, early morning light, he realized that heroism did not always come in grand gestures. Sometimes, it came in the form of a single person stopping on a cold street, making a phone call, lifting a stranger into a car, and driving through the night to give someone a chance at life. It came in acts of ordinary bravery, in the willingness to face fear and act anyway, in the compassion that made him see another human being not as a stranger, but as someone worth saving. The father sat back, letting the exhaustion wash over him, but also feeling the quiet pride of having acted when it mattered. The night had tested him in ways he had never imagined, and he had emerged not just as a survivor, but as someone who had made a real difference. And that thought, that quiet satisfaction of having done the right thing, would stay with him forever. Shaping the way he saw the world and his place in it, the father's hand shook slightly as he started the engine. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, the weight of the police officer beside him was heavy, not only in body, but in responsibility. He could feel the officer's shallow breathing and saw the faint twitching of his hands, reminding him that every second mattered. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet, with only a few cars passing and distant sounds of life echoing through the night. He kept glancing at the officer, whispering softly, "Just stay with me, sir. You're going to make it." He realized that the nearest hospital was not close, and that made his heart pound faster. He had to make it in time, but he also knew he had to drive carefully. Panic threatened to take over, but he forced himself to focus. He thought about everything he could remember from a first aid course years ago. He adjusted the officer's position, keeping his airway open, and tried to check his pulse without causing more pain. The officer groaned faintly, and the father leaned closer, trying to encourage him. "You're doing fine, sir. Just hold on a little longer. Help is coming." The officer's eyes flickered open for a brief moment, barely aware of his surroundings, and then closed again. The father felt a mix of fear and determination surge through him. He could not let this man die. He had to get him to the hospital alive. Traffic was light, but every stoplight felt like an eternity. The father carefully weaved through the streets, keeping an eye out for any obstacles. He kept talking to the officer, asking simple questions, repeating his name if he knew it, anything to keep him conscious. When the officer's groans became weaker, the father's heart sank. But he pushed his fear down and focused on breathing and monitoring his condition. He felt like he was carrying not just a body, but a life, a responsibility that was larger than anything he had faced before. At one point, the officer began to convulse slightly, and the father's stomach twisted. He pulled over briefly, trying to calm him and make sure nothing serious would happen in the car. He ran his hands over the officer's arms, feeling for a response, whispering reassurances the entire time. He felt helpless, yet he also felt a strange clarity. He knew he had to act, even if he was afraid of making a mistake. His mind worked quickly, recalling bits of emergency knowledge, reminding himself to keep the airway clear, to monitor breathing, and to stay calm. Once he started driving again, he noticed a group of people standing on the corner, watching him nervously. He waved them off, knowing he could not stop. Every second mattered. The city seemed to stretch endlessly, streets winding, lights flickering, shadows moving in ways that made him tense. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, imagining the faces of those who would miss the officer if he didn't make it. That thought pushed him forward, faster, but still careful, balancing urgency with safety. His mind drifted briefly to his own child. Waiting at home, probably worried because he was later than usual, the thought of returning to that warm, safe place gave him courage. He imagined his little one's face, full of trust and love, and he realized he had to protect life, no matter whose it was. His thoughts returned to the officer, seeing the man as not just a uniform, but a human being whose life was hanging in the balance. He felt an unexpected connection, a sense of shared humanity. The officer's breathing grew shallower, and the father felt panic creeping in again. He spoke louder this time, trying to keep the officer awake. "Sir, you have to stay with me? You can do this. Just a little longer." His own voice sounded steady, though inside he was trembling. He kept adjusting the officer's position, supporting his back and head as best he could. Every bump on the road made his heart leap. Every jolt a reminder that life was fragile and unpredictable. The city streets opened to a more open road, and the father could see the hospital lights in the distance. Relief and tension clashed in his chest. He pushed the car faster, carefully, trying to make every second count without causing further harm. He glanced at the officer, noticing faint color returning to his lips and a weak squeeze of his hand when he called his name. The father smiled faintly, feeling a small hope that they might make it. When he finally reached the hospital entrance, he parked hastily and ran to the officer, lifting him as gently as possible and carrying him inside. Nurses and doctors rushed to take the officer from him. The father explained quickly what had happened, his voice shaking but urgent. They took over immediately, pushing the officer on a gurney and disappearing into the emergency room. The father stepped back, chest heaving, watching them work with rapid, professional movements. He felt a wave of exhaustion hit him, his adrenaline crashing. He had done everything he could, and now it was out of his hands. The nurse turned to him and nodded, telling him the officer was stable for now. Relief mixed with worry flooded him. He had faced one of the scariest moments of his life, but the outcome was still uncertain. He sank into a chair in the waiting room, letting his head rest in his hands, trying to calm his racing heart. As he sat there, he thought about the strange chain of events that had brought him here. A routine night, a simple drive home, had turned into a fight for someone else's life. He reflected on how fragile life could be, how quickly things could change, and how ordinary people could find themselves in extraordinary situations. He realized that courage was not always something you could plan or predict. It often appeared in moments that demanded it most. Hours passed slowly, and the father remained in the waiting room, restless and worried. He thought about the officer, imagining the pain he must have felt, the fear and the struggle. He thought about his own child and the life he had built. And he felt gratitude for what he had, while understanding that life could be cruel and unpredictable. He silently prayed that the officer would recover, that the risks they had faced would not be in vain. The father's mind wandered to what might happen after this night. He wondered if he would be thanked, if the police would see him as a hero, or if this would simply be one of those moments in life that went unnoticed. But then he realized it didn't matter. The important thing was that he had acted, that he had chosen courage and compassion over fear and hesitation. That knowledge brought him a quiet satisfaction, a sense of purpose that went beyond any recognition. The night stretched into early morning, and the father felt the exhaustion in his body. Yet his mind remained alert, replaying the moments in vivid detail. He remembered lifting the officer, the rough texture of his uniform, the faint warmth of his skin, the sound of his shallow breathing. Each detail reminded him of the responsibility he had carried, and the courage he had found within himself. He thought about how life often demanded ordinary people to rise to extraordinary challenges, how a single decision made in a moment of fear and urgency could save a life. He thought about the officer, a stranger who now depended on him, and he felt a strange bond, a human connection forged in the fire of crisis. He realized that heroism was not always about medals or praise. Sometimes it was about being present, being brave, and doing what was right when it mattered most. As the first rays of dawn appeared through the hospital windows, the father felt a shift inside himself. He had faced fear, acted with courage, and given a life a chance to continue. He understood that life was fragile, that moments of crisis could reveal the strength within ordinary people. He had stepped into a role he never expected, and in doing so, he had discovered the depth of his own humanity. By the time doctors emerged to give a brief update, the father felt a mix of relief and anticipation. The officer was stable, though recovery would take time. He nodded, taking a deep breath, feeling the tension ease slightly. He realized that the night had changed him, that he had faced one of the most intense challenges of his life, and had acted with compassion and courage. He knew that this experience would stay with him forever, a reminder of the power of human action and the importance of stepping forward when it mattered most. Sitting in the waiting room, the father reflected on everything he had learned. He understood that life was unpredictable, that courage often came when least expected, that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences. He felt grateful for the chance to act, for the ability to face fear, and for the reminder that human connection could be found even in the most difficult circumstances. And as the sun rose, casting a soft glow through the windows, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing he had done everything he could to save a life and had found the courage to act. When it mattered most, the father felt his legs tremble as he sank into a chair in the hospital waiting room. He could still feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The memory of lifting the officer into his car, the rough touch of the uniform, and the shallow breaths that had terrified him. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, but the fear and tension had not left. Every few minutes, he glanced at the emergency room doors, hoping for news, praying that the officer had made it through the initial care. Time seemed to move differently in the hospital. Each passing minute stretched into what felt like an hour. The father watched the nurses move quickly, efficiently, between rooms, their calm professionalism contrasting sharply with the chaos that had consumed him only hours ago. He tried to read their expressions, searching for a sign that the officer was safe. Every hurried glance, every whispered conversation among the staff made his heart leap and then sink again. A nurse approached him finally, her eyes kind but tired. She asked him to explain exactly what had happened. The father's words came quickly, almost spilling over as he recounted the moment he had found the officer, the call to emergency services, and the drive to the hospital. He did not leave out a single detail because he knew that every second had mattered. She listened quietly, nodding, asking questions, and typing notes into the computer. Despite her calm demeanor, the father could see the faint worry in her eyes. "He's stable for now," she said gently, "but the next few hours are critical. We need to monitor him closely and ensure there are no complications." The father nodded, his chest tight. He wanted to say more, to ask questions, but the nurse had already moved on. Leaving him alone with his thoughts once more, sitting in the waiting room, he reflected on how quickly life could change. A routine evening had turned into a test of courage and quick thinking. He thought about the officer, a stranger who had become the center of his world, and he wondered about the man's life, the challenges he had faced, and the dangers of the job that had brought him to that sidewalk. The father felt a mixture of empathy and admiration. Realizing that even the strongest among them were vulnerable, hours passed slowly. The father stood, stretched, and walked the hallways, restless and tense. He noticed other families, other people waiting, some with similar worries, some with different stories, yet all sharing the same fragile hope that the one they cared about would survive. He felt connected to them, even as he remained consumed by his own fear for the officer. He whispered silent prayers, hoping that his actions had made a difference. The father thought about how easily people could judge others in difficult situations. He knew some might question why he had acted alone, why he had taken the officer into his car instead of waiting for emergency personnel. But he also knew that he had acted out of instinct, out of a deep desire to help, and he hoped that whatever judgment there might be, it would not overshadow the fact that he had saved a life. He realized that sometimes doing the right thing meant taking risks, even if others did not understand. At one point, a doctor emerged from the emergency room, stopping briefly to speak to the father. The man was young, with a tired expression but a calm voice. "He's stable, thanks to your quick thinking," the doctor said. "We're continuing to monitor him, and we'll keep him under observation. There's still a long road ahead, but you did everything right." The father felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion, his shoulders sagging as a deep breath escaped him. He nodded, feeling gratitude and pride, but also a quiet acknowledgement of the struggle that still lay ahead. The father returned to his chair, leaning back and trying to process the emotions flooding him. Fear, relief, worry, pride, they all mixed together in a way that left him drained yet strangely alive. He thought about his own child waiting at home, imagining the warm comfort of their presence, and he realized that his small acts of courage had a ripple effect. One person's life saved could change countless others, he thought, and in that quiet moment, he felt the weight and the beauty of responsibility. As the hours wore on, the father found himself talking to the officer in his mind, imagining the man's thoughts and feelings. He visualized the officer waking up, weak but aware, and felt a surge of hope. He wondered what the man had experienced in those moments of unconsciousness, and he hoped that his presence, his whispers, his attempts to keep him awake had mattered. He realized that human connection could exist even in silence, even without recognition, and that it could be powerful enough to bridge fear and suffering. The hospital environment, though calm on the surface, held its own tension. The father noticed other emergencies, other lives hanging in balance, and he felt a deep respect for the doctors and nurses who navigated this constant uncertainty with skill and patience. He observed the small details, the way a nurse gently adjusted a patient's blanket, the soft reassurance of a doctor to a family member, the efficiency with which the staff worked. He marveled at their dedication, realizing that ordinary people could do extraordinary things every day without even thinking about it. At one point, a security officer approached the father, asking questions about the incident. The father explained briefly, careful to stay calm and clear, but also protective of the officer. He wanted to make sure the man he had helped would be treated with respect, that no bureaucratic issues would interfere with his recovery. The security officer nodded, taking notes, and reassured him that everything was in order. The father felt a small relief, knowing that at least one part of the system would not cause further complications. Despite the reassurances, worry remained. The father paced the waiting area, thinking about how life could shift in a moment, how 1 second could change everything. He considered the risks he had taken, the uncertainty of the officer's condition, and the fragility of life. Yet he also felt a quiet strength, a sense of purpose that had grown from acting without hesitation, from choosing to help when it was needed most. He realized that courage was not always grand gestures. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, persistent action. Even in the face of fear, the father's thoughts returned to his own struggles. The challenges of raising a child alone, the long hours at work, and the simple routines of life that now seemed both distant and precious. He reflected on how life could demand unexpected heroism from ordinary people, and he felt a deep respect for those moments when courage appeared, unannounced but undeniable. He understood that his actions tonight had not only affected the officer's life, but had changed him in a fundamental way. As night slowly turned to early morning, the father remained in the waiting room, observing the quiet rhythm of the hospital. He noticed the small victories, the moments of relief and comfort that punctuated the tension, and he felt a renewed sense of hope. He thought about the officer's life, the family he might have, and the responsibilities he carried. The father felt honored to be a part of this moment, to have acted with compassion and courage, and to have faced fear head-on. Finally, a nurse emerged with a more detailed update. The officer had stabilized further, his vital signs showing improvement, though continued monitoring and care were necessary. The father exhaled, feeling a profound sense of relief and gratitude. He had done what he could, and it had mattered. The officer's life was no longer in immediate danger, and that knowledge gave the father a quiet peace. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to feel the weight of both exhaustion and accomplishment. In that waiting room, surrounded by the quiet hum of the hospital, the father realized that life could be unpredictable and fragile. He understood that courage and compassion often appeared in unexpected moments, and that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary challenges when needed. He felt a sense of connection to the officer, to the staff, and to the countless others who relied on human kindness and bravery in moments of crisis. Hours later, as the sun began to rise and light streamed through the windows, the father remained vigilant yet calm. He knew the road ahead for the officer was still long, but the immediate danger had passed. He reflected on the night's events, the choices he had made, and the courage he had found within himself. He understood that true heroism was often quiet, humble, and unseen, and he felt proud to have acted when it mattered most. The hospital had become a place of reflection, not just for the father, but for everyone who moved within it. He observed small acts of care and kindness, moments of connection and support, and he felt a deep appreciation for the human spirit. He realized that life's challenges could bring out both fear and bravery, despair and hope, and that his actions, though small in the grand scheme, had contributed to a life being saved. As he prepared to leave the waiting room briefly to make a phone call to his child, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had faced uncertainty and fear, acted with courage, and made a difference. He understood that life would continue, with its struggles and challenges, but he also knew that this night had changed him, strengthened him, and reminded him of the power of compassion and action. He had been tested, and he had risen to the moment, leaving a mark not just on the officer's life, but on his own. Days passed slowly in the hospital, each one feeling longer than the last. The father stayed nearby as much as he could, balancing his responsibilities at home while checking in frequently. Each visit brought the same tension, the same cautious hope. He had learned to read the small signs, the rise and fall of the officer's chest, the slight flicker of an eyelid, the faintest movement of a hand. These small moments gave him hope, a reminder that his efforts had made a difference. On one particular morning, father arrived to find the officer stirring slightly. The man's eyes fluttered open, confused and weak, but alive. The father's heart leaped. He approached slowly, kneeling beside the bed, and spoke softly. "You're awake. How are you feeling?" The officer tried to focus, his voice barely audible, but it carried a tone of recognition. I remember. The street, you." His words were broken, but the gratitude was clear. The father smiled gently, taking the officer's hand in his own. He could feel the warmth and life returning, slowly but surely. "You're safe now. You're going to be okay," he reassured him. Over the next few hours, the officer's condition continued to improve. The father stayed close, offering quiet encouragement, helping with small tasks, and simply being present. The bond between them grew silently, built on the shared experience of fear, courage, and survival. The officer's gratitude was not just for being saved, but for the presence of someone who had cared enough to act without hesitation. The hospital staff noticed the connection as well. Nurses and doctors often smiled at the father, offering small words of encouragement. Recognizing the role he had played in the officer's recovery, he had become more than a visitor. He had become a quiet source of support, someone who had stepped into an extraordinary situation and handled it with calm and care. The officer began to speak more clearly over the next few days. He shared fragments of his story, the circumstances that had led him to be alone on the street, the dangers he faced, and the fear he had felt. The father listened attentively, never interrupting, offering comfort through presence and understanding. He realized that heroism was not just in action but in listening, being there for someone in their most vulnerable moments. Each day brought small victories. The officer could sit up, eat, and even manage brief walks around the hospital room. The father encouraged him gently, celebrating each milestone. He felt pride in the officer's resilience, and a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his own actions had helped make this recovery possible. There was a sense of shared accomplishment, an unspoken understanding that they had faced something extraordinary together. One afternoon, the officer managed a weak smile and spoke more clearly. "I owe you my life," he said. The father shook his head, smiling softly. "You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone would do if they could. The important thing is that you're alive." But the officer insisted, his gratitude sincere. He spoke of the fear he had felt, the darkness closing in, and how the father's presence had given him hope. "I don't remember much, but I know you saved me." "I couldn't have made it without you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. The father felt a lump in his throat, understanding that the impact of his actions went beyond the immediate rescue. He had given the officer a chance to continue living, and that was a profound responsibility and honor. As the officer grew stronger, the two of them talked more openly. The father shared his own struggles as a single parent, the challenges of daily life, and the simple joys he found in raising his child. The officer listened with genuine interest, and in turn, shared more about his life, his job, and the sense of duty that sometimes left him vulnerable. They began to understand each other not just as rescuer and rescued, but as human beings who had faced fear and survived. The father noticed subtle changes in the officer's demeanor. He was more reflective, more appreciative of small gestures, and more aware of the fragility of life. There was a quiet humility in his gratitude, a recognition that life could be unpredictable and that ordinary people could perform extraordinary acts. The father admired this growth, feeling that the experience had changed them both in meaningful ways. During this time, the father continued to visit his child, balancing the demands of parenthood with the responsibilities he felt toward the officer. He managed to keep his routines, returning to the hospital each day, often sitting quietly at the officer's bedside, reading, or simply talking softly. The bond deepened, not through grand gestures, through consistent presence and shared understanding. One evening, the officer asked the father to sit closer. He wanted to speak privately, away from the bustle of hospital staff. He expressed his gratitude more fully, speaking of how rare it was to encounter someone who acted purely out of compassion, without thought of reward or recognition. The father listened, touched but humble, knowing that the true reward was the officer's survival and recovery as the days turned into a week. The officer began to regain strength rapidly. Physical therapy sessions were introduced, and the father accompanied him, offering encouragement and moral support. The officer struggled at first, but the father's steady presence and quiet reassurance made a significant difference. The two of them celebrated each milestone together, small victories that marked the journey from vulnerability to resilience. The hospital staff continued to support them. Noticing the unique relationship that had formed, they commented on the father's unwavering commitment and the officer's growing appreciation for the ordinary acts that had saved his life. It was a reminder to everyone that courage and compassion often appeared in the most unexpected places, and that human connection could be a powerful force in healing. As the officer prepared to be discharged, he asked the father to visit him at home. He wanted to continue their connection, to express gratitude in a more personal setting, and to acknowledge the role the father had played in his survival. The father agreed, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He knew that the experience had changed both of them, creating a bond that went beyond mere circumstance. On the day of discharge, the father helped the officer into a car, making sure he was comfortable and supported. The journey to his home was filled with quiet conversation, laughter, and shared reflections on the events that had brought them together. The officer expressed his gratitude again, not just for being saved, but for the presence, patience, and humanity that had made the recovery possible. Once at the officer's home, the father helped him settle in, arranging basic necessities and ensuring he was comfortable. They spoke about the future, the importance of resilience, and the lessons they had learned from the experience. The officer acknowledged that the father's actions had not only saved his life, but had also inspired him to appreciate the small, meaningful connections in life. The father returned home that evening, exhausted but fulfilled. He thought about the officer, the journey they had shared, and the growth that had come from a moment of crisis. He understood that heroism was often quiet, grounded in presence, empathy, and the courage to act when it mattered most. He also realized that life had a way of connecting people in unexpected ways, creating bonds that could shape their perspectives and values. In the days that followed, the father continued to support the officer as needed, offering guidance, encouragement, and companionship. Their relationship evolved into a genuine friendship, built on shared experience and mutual respect. The father reflected on how one decision, one act of compassion, had created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate moment, affecting lives, perspectives, and futures. Through this experience, the father learned that ordinary people could perform extraordinary acts, that courage often appeared in moments of fear, and that human connection was a powerful force in healing and recovery. The officer's life had been saved, not just by medical intervention, but by the unwavering presence and care of someone who acted selflessly and with heart. This realization filled the father with quiet pride and a renewed sense of purpose. As he sat quietly at home that night, thinking about the journey they had shared, the father understood that life was unpredictable, fragile, and precious. He felt grateful for the opportunity to act, to make a difference, and to witness the resilience of another human being. The bond with the officer had become a source of inspiration, a reminder that courage, compassion, and empathy could create meaningful change in ways that were profound and lasting. The day finally arrived when the officer was cleared to leave the hospital. The father had been there throughout the recovery, quietly supporting him, offering encouragement, and celebrating each small victory along the way. He had witnessed the officer regain strength, watch him eat, walk, and even laugh again. Each milestone had been a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of compassion and courage in times of need. As they prepared to leave the hospital, the officer expressed his deep gratitude once more. "I don't know how to thank you enough," he said, his voice steady but emotional. The father shook his head gently. "You don't need to thank me. I did what anyone would do. The important thing is that you're alive and well." They stepped out into the fresh air, the sun shining brightly, casting warm light over the city. The officer took a deep breath, smiling faintly. It was the first time in days that he seemed completely at ease. The father helped him into the car, making sure he was comfortable, and they drove slowly through the streets. There was a quiet sense of accomplishment, feeling that the worst was behind them, that life could continue in a meaningful way. Once at the officer's home, the father helped him settle in. He made sure that the basics were arranged, the bed was comfortable, water and snacks were available, and the space was welcoming. The officer looked around, clearly touched by the care and attention. "You've done so much," he said softly, a tone of admiration in his voice. The father smiled, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He had acted out of instinct, compassion, and the simple understanding that another life mattered. Over the next few days, the father continued to visit, helping the officer adjust to life outside the hospital. They shared quiet conversations about the experience, reflecting on the fear, courage, and humanity that had defined the last few weeks. The officer spoke openly about how the father's actions had saved his life, and how they had inspired him to view the world differently. There was a sense of deep connection, a bond that went beyond gratitude and into genuine friendship. The father also shared his own life, his challenges, and the joys of raising his child alone. The officer listened attentively, asking questions, offering advice, and expressing genuine interest. It became clear that both of them had learned from the experience not just about courage and survival, but about empathy, resilience, and the power of human connection. Word of the father's heroism began to spread quietly among the police force. The officer spoke of the events, praising the father's quick thinking, courage, and compassion. His colleagues were surprised, some initially skeptical, but eventually, the story of an ordinary man stepping into extraordinary circumstances inspired respect and admiration. The father never sought recognition, but he could feel the appreciation in the officer's words and in the small gestures from those around him. The officer's recovery continued steadily, and as he regained strength, he insisted on publicly acknowledging the father's role in saving his life. There was no ceremony or official event planned, but the officer spoke personally to his colleagues, recounting the story and emphasizing the father's bravery and humanity. The father felt uncomfortable with the attention, but he also understood that recognition could highlight the importance of ordinary people acting with courage in critical moments. In the weeks that followed, the officer and the father continued to meet regularly. They shared meals, exchanged stories, and supported each other in practical ways. The father's child became a familiar presence, and the officer developed a warm, friendly relationship with the family. It was clear that their bond had become more than the immediate circumstances. It had grown into a meaningful friendship built on trust, respect, and shared experience. The father also reflected on how the experience had changed him. He had always known the challenges of daily life, struggles of raising a child alone, and the importance of providing care and guidance. But this event had shown him the impact one person could have in moments of crisis. The significance of courage and empathy, and the ways ordinary actions could shape the lives of others. It was a lesson he would carry forever, a reminder of the value of human connection and responsibility. The officer, in turn, began to view his job and life differently. He realized how vulnerable he had been, how much he had relied on someone else's courage, and how deeply gratitude and humility could affect a person's perspective. He spoke often of the father, emphasizing that true heroism sometimes came from unexpected places. From ordinary people willing to act without hesitation or reward, the father continued to support his child's routines, balancing work and family life, but he also found a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. He understood that he had faced one of the most intense challenges of his life, and had acted with integrity and compassion. The experience had shown him the depth of his own resilience and the value of stepping forward when it mattered most. As the months passed, the officer fully recovered and returned to duty, stronger and more reflective than before. He maintained contact with the father, visiting regularly and sharing moments of life that went beyond work or circumstance. Their friendship remained strong, a testament to the bond formed under extraordinary conditions. The father often reflected on how a single decision made in fear and urgency had led to such meaningful and lasting connections. One day, the officer invited the father and his child to a small gathering with some colleagues and friends. Not as a ceremony, but as a celebration of life and human courage. The father felt a quiet pride watching the officer interact with others. Knowing that the story they shared had inspired a deeper understanding of humanity, the gathering was filled with warmth, gratitude, and the acknowledgement that courage and empathy could create ripples far beyond the immediate moment. The father continued to live his life with humility and care, understanding that ordinary acts of compassion could have extraordinary consequences. He carried the memory of that night, the fear, the urgency, the responsibility, and the triumph with him always. It reminded him of the fragility of life and the power of human action, inspiring him to approach each day with empathy, courage, and awareness. The officer, too, carried the experience as a reminder of gratitude and resilience. He often reflected on the father's selfless actions, understanding that the greatest lessons sometimes came from those who acted quietly, without seeking recognition, and with pure intent. Their friendship became a model of mutual respect, compassion, and shared growth, showing how extraordinary bonds could arise from moments of crisis. In the end, life returned to a new sense of normalcy, but both the father and the officer knew that they had been forever changed. The story of that night, the rescue, the recovery, was not just about survival, it was about courage, humanity, and the profound impact that one person could have on another. It was a reminder that even in the darkest and most uncertain moments, ordinary people could act with extraordinary compassion, leaving a lasting mark on the world, on the lives they touched. The father often reflected on the lessons learned, the importance of action, the value of empathy, and the quiet heroism that resided in every person willing to face fear for the sake of another. He knew that life was unpredictable, but he also understood that courage and humanity could shape outcomes in ways that were meaningful and lasting. He carried this knowledge with him, applying it to his life, his family, and the relationships he nurtured. Knowing that one act of compassion could change everything, the officer, fully recovered and back at work, never forgot the father's role in saving his life. He spoke of him often, not just to colleagues, but to anyone willing to listen, highlighting the power of ordinary bravery. Their bond remained strong, a testament to human resilience, trust, and the profound connections that could emerge from moments of crisis. Both of them carried the story forward, not as a tale of heroism for recognition, but as a reminder that compassion, courage, and presence could transform lives in ways that were both subtle and extraordinary. Through this experience, the father learned the lasting impact of his actions. He understood that true heroism often came quietly, through choices made in fear and urgency, and that ordinary people could shape extraordinary outcomes. The officer's survival, their growing friendship, the lessons learned from that night became a source of inspiration and reflection, shaping how they approached life, relationships, and challenges. Together, they had experienced the depth of human resilience, and together, they carried forward the understanding that courage, empathy, and action could leave an enduring mark on the world.